Happy Earth Day to you. A reading from the book of Genesis. And now no shrub had yet appeared on the earth, and no plant had yet sprung up. For God had not sent rain on the earth, and there was no one to work the ground. But streams came up from the earth and watered the whole surface of the ground. Then God formed a human from the dust of the ground and breathed into their nostrils the breath of life, and the human became a living being. God took the human and put them in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And God commanded the human, "You are free to eat of any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For when you eat from it, you will certainly die." Will you pray with me? Speak, great one, great creator, speak to this your people on this day, that they might hear a word of life and truth and be transformed in its hearing. Not me, O God, but you. Take this weak vessel, these lips of clay, and say eternal things, that your people will live and know and serve. May it be so. I think it's a great blessing that we observe Earth Day while we are yet in the season of Easter. And it's because we are in the season of Easter, Earth Day is now able to have a decidedly more theologically and spiritually rich inflection. As we take the opportunity of Earth Day to discern faithful action to honor, protect, and restore God's good creation, we are still invited in this season to kindle a resurrection faith. A resurrection faith that embodies and testifies to the promise and possibility of life over and beyond death. To understand that life breaks through no matter how hard and bleak and unjust things may be. I experienced that Easter reality, that resurrection faith, just this past week when I traveled to Fort Lauderdale to visit friends, only days after flood waters covered the city. As the water receded, a landscape teeming with life greeted us. Not just the people who survived and who came together to take care of one another, to clean up and to help their neighbors, but teeming with life. Birds, iguanas, a lot of iguanas. And trees and plants thriving after this disaster in a veritable symphony of praise for life. God's good creation testifying to resurrection before my very eyes. And yet, the speed and intensity of the storm that brought that flood had something to do with us. That we had been in some way responsible. Human action, our use of fossil fuels, and our failure to address the climate crisis played some role in it. In fact, the increasing speed and intensity of the major storms, fires, and losses of species and habitats all around the world in recent years indicate that they are climate-induced. Now, I'm typically a policy wonk, so I'm going to resist going through all the studies that tell you why I said that sentence. But climate-induced. And so I thought it fitting that we take the opportunity of Earth Day to go back to the site and story of biblical creation, to understand what is at stake in our current moment of climate change, of ecological devastation, and indeed a hunger for environmental justice. I'll say up front, it has been heartbreaking to me how much we have missed in reading the book of Genesis, especially in the creation stories. For reasons obvious and some mysterious, the church and people of faith have gotten so wrapped up in the ideological battles over evolution, original sin, and biblical literalism that we have missed the tremendous pastoral and spiritual focus of the creation story. We have missed this grand story about God's amazing grace, about God's boundless abundance, and yes, God's warm embrace of humanity as covenant partners in the act of creation. Yes, consider that in the act of creation, we were in the divine mind as partners. But you see, much of our religious talk about the Garden of Eden and the story of Adam and Eve sounds more like an ideological debate between partisans rather than discerning conversations among people of faith about the graciousness of God and the goodness of what we have. And the sad result is that many people have come to doubt the meaning and power of this gift of creation and lost sight of our calling as part of God's good creation. And unfortunately, that means that we are apt to miss out on a powerful illustration of just how wantonly generous God is and what is expected of us in return. Our text today is the second story of creation. Yes, there are two. That's what happens when smart people decide they didn't like the first one. But unlike the first story, which provides a day-by-day account of the origins of the natural earth and the animal and plant life as envisioned by the priests of Israel. You know the story on the first day, on the second day. This second account is a succinct and to-the-point parable about a God who is so intimately connected and determined to usher in something new, big, and eternal. According to this story, before God made the earth and the heavens, nothing existed on the planet. No fields or pastures of vegetation, and no plant and animal life to speak of. And yet God saw to it that that earth would get all it needed to sustain life. And so streams of water came up to ensure that plants and animals would be birthed and nurtured. Notice the difference between the context of floodwaters and these streams of abundance. Then God formed a human from the dust of the ground and breathed the breath of life into the human's nostrils, and life came up. Then God placed the human in the garden that came forth because of the water and dust and told the human, "You may eat from any tree in the garden." Then it gets a little tricky. But stay away from the one tree. Oh, that's when we humans get nervous. We almost missed the permission. We went straight to the prohibition. Stay away from the one tree. The one tree that causes you to know more than you need to know. The one tree that causes you to doubt God's abundance. The one tree that causes you to fear that there might not be enough. The one tree that causes you to want to hoard the blessings of God. And it begs the question this morning, especially in our own habits and our own way of existing, what is the one tree for us? Despite all the goodness and abundance that is available to us, what is the one tree? That God formed. That God formed all of it for our use. We got hung up on the one tree, the one stumbling block that distracts us from responding to God's abundance with humility, gratitude, faithfulness. Oh, I know now someone want to get scientific on me and say, preacher, now did any of this happen the way you just said? But I want us first to meditate on what this account is saying about God. The various scientific theories about the earth's origins won't be helpful this morning in our meditation on the divine creative overflow and abundance that we have. Instead, I want us to think about what this account says about a creator who uses the divine prerogative to bring life, food, growth, and newness when there was none. Forget about all the theories and interpretations and doctrines of evolution, original sin, and biblical literalism, and think about what picture this account is painting of God. I'll draw it for you just as best I can. All we see here is a God who is acting, creating, giving, and providing, bringing into being life and providing all that life will need to thrive and grow. This is not a stingy deity. This is not a greedy God. This is not a God who pits life against life. This is not a zero-sum God mired in scarcity. This is not a God that is giving you a basement to hoard more. No, this is a God of abundance. And so God was providing abundance from the beginning, including us and for us. But it doesn't end there. Look at the gifts that God is providing that remains ours as a birthright. We receive 3 gifts from God that illustrate a divine abundance from the beginning. And I apologize, I'm not a Baptist preacher, but that 3 sounds very Baptist right now. But 3 gifts. 3 gifts. First, we get the essence of the divine. God breathes into the nostrils of the human the breath of life. Consider that. Our very bodies are infused with divine breath of life. Never let anyone tell us that we are totally depraved and worthless. Divine material is embedded in every atom, molecule, and cell of our bodies. Knowing that we carry within us a part of the divine essence should inspire us to see God in one another, to see God in creation, to see ourselves connected to all of creation and accept our identities as the divine offspring that we truly are. The second gift we're given is an abundant harvest from the earth, in the flowing of the water, the flourishing of the garden, and the tilling of pastures of plants that can sustain life. God reveals that the earth has all that it needs to feed humanity. In God's economy, this good earth is not sectioned off to the highest bidder. The harvest is not parsed for sale in the market. The human creation has access. The human creation has access. I'm going to say it a 3rd time so it can get it embedded in your mind. The human creation has access to all that is needed for life. What if policy reflected that? Had access to all. And unfortunately, the bounty of this earth has been so privatized and commodified that world hunger has reached epidemic proportions. Scientists have determined long ago, even before I was born, that there is enough food to feed the world. But our economic systems thrive in creating scarcity, eating even out of the earth's abundance. And finally, the 3rd gift God gave us in this account of creation is permission to enjoy and live in God's abundance. God first invited us to eat anything we wanted and then to take care of the garden. And it's unfortunate. Our translation says that the human should work and take care of the garden. But the Hebrew word used here for to take care reveals that God called the human to serve the garden. To serve. So we're permitted to eat anything we want, even as we are called to serve that which feeds us, to serve that which provides us with life. Oh, and yet, good old church folk, they immediately jump over God's declaration to the human that you may eat from any tree, straight to the prohibition on eating from the tree. Or, worse, they go to the idea of human dominion over everything. We get to do whatever we want. But God does not begin in prohibition. God starts with permission. And God does not sanction unlimited consumption. God calls us to serve. We are free to enjoy what God gives us while understanding that we are called to serve God's creation, not abuse it, misuse it, or kill it. So this meditation of Genesis begs questions that echo loudly and urgently in light of the climate crisis we are facing. Who are we in this creation? What is our role in this creation? And how do we honor creation as an overflowing gift of life and good and a precious commodity to serve when it can be so easily degraded and exploited? And perhaps that's why this second creation story reads like a parable. Embedded within this story of gift and abundance is a warning of what may happen when we see scarcity in God's abundance. When we exploit the earth, not for what we need to live, but to secure more at the expense of our neighbor, at the expense of the earth itself. Perhaps this story gives us a window into the tragedy that awaits us if we consume and exploit Earth's resources without limits because we've gotten better at extracting more of it cheaply and efficiently. Perhaps the tree of knowledge we have gone to repeatedly is a metaphor for our increasing technological know-how and more powerful machinery, which has furnished us with ever more creative, efficient, and productive ways to extract and exploit more of the earth. That to surely die, or certainly die, is a prophetic warning to us about the millions of species lost, natural habitats destroyed, displacement and dislocation of the poor in every corner of the globe, and death and destruction in the wake of intense storms and fires, all because of human action that keeps warming this planet. All of the gifts of God come out of a divine abundance that we too often take for granted. We forget it, we dismiss it, we misunderstand it. But as God's beloved, it is essential that we remember as best we can that God remains a source of abundance, not a source of scarcity. And we have to keep reminding ourselves of this because our Western capitalist economy has tamed, domesticated, and commodified God's generous act of creation. We have made the bounty of the harvest into a scarce commodity, declaring that there isn't enough to feed the hungry and provide for the needs of the weakest among us. We have discounted the human body, seeing it as a source of evil and depravity, unworthy of love and respect. We have characterized God's gracious act of creation as solely an act of denial and prohibition because we fear freedom but crave control of it. And we have distorted God's call to humanity to serve the earth. Serve it. Serve it as a call. Serve it. Not have dominion over it. And so, my hope on this Earth Day, this Earth Sunday, is that we read the creation story anew, not to confirm any of the theological orthodoxies that swirl around church folk, the theological orthodoxies of dominion, of human depravity, of evolution, none of that, but to see that God's creation has planetary integrity. And because of that, we are called to serve it with humility, gratitude, and faithfulness. I pray that we come to know deep within ourselves that the products and commodities that the world hoards and privatizes in service to the market all begin as gifts to be freely enjoyed by all God's children. That's how they all began, as free gifts of goodness. How can we find our way back to that good creation for the benefit of all? I'm warning you, what I just said, someone could really take that out of context and call me a communist or a socialist. You know, they do that too. But in God's divine imagination and gracious act of abundance, we have access to blessings and riches untold. And yes, even as that occurs, the oppression and domination of the earth and its resources cry out for justice, for generosity, for good stewardship. And as an Easter people with a resurrection faith, and I'm claiming it now, everyone who's sitting in it, we are an Easter people with resurrection faith. We know that we have a role to play in co-redeeming and co-creating with God this good creation. And so in remembering and meditating on God's gracious gifts, let God's gift of abundance fill us with love, grace, and generosity, and yes, urgency. Urgency about it. There was abundance from the beginning. And there is abundance on this earth for us now. I pray that we work together. We accept our call to serve so that we can ensure that that abundance will be available to the generations that will come after us. May it be so.